Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. This is my follow-up video to the previous video dealing with industrialization. So what we're talking about today, or what we're going to talk about in this video, are just two important concepts when it comes to industrialization and some industrial concepts as it relates to the modern world that we live in. And these are some of the more recent developments in industrialization that are really interesting and exciting and really impact the industrial world that we live in. So the first one was called the International Division of Labor. Now, really, by a lot of people, this is used kind of as a derogatory concept because it's something that's developed as a part of communist philosophy. And this idea that, just like we were talking about in the previous video, Karl Marx talks about what's called the division of labor. And so, just like I talked about in the previous video, where what you do is you take the elements of labor and you divide it up among several people, and so that way you take a process that was at one time skilled and you break it down to where it's no longer as skilled, and therefore that person who's doing the job is more dispensable. You don't have to pay them as much, and especially in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, you don't necessarily have to treat them quite as well, and they're fairly expendable. But anyway, so you take that concept of the division of labor and the dividing up the different elements of the industrial process, and this is dealing with taking that same concept and then dividing it across the globe. And so really, when we talk about the International Division of Labor, we're talking about the fact that different parts of the labor process are divided geographically across the entire world. And so when you think about this, you can think of it similar to the idea of the core, semi-periphery, and the periphery concept that we talked about in the political geography unit. So this idea that really each region within the world, whether it be the core, semi-periphery, or periphery, provides a specific type of labor to the entire industrial process. And so, of course, that's now possible because of things like globalization, improvements in transportation, improvements in infrastructural development, improvements in economy, really all across the world. But again, this is really seen as kind of a derogatory concept because those who hold to things like the dependency theory and see the world and the world economy as kind of controlled by Western countries, wealthier countries, they use this idea as, just like Karl Marx would have said, that they are dividing up the elements of labor and using this division of labor to keep the less developed regions of the world poor. But of course, as a part of this, it's what allows us to get cheaply produced goods, and it also allows for more specialization of labor. And so what I mean by specialization of labor is really each region kind of specializes in the production of certain components that are part of the industrial process. And so typically we talk about countries doing things that they have what's called a comparative advantage, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the unit. And so that's how this division of labor is divvied up, is that the countries participate in things that they have a comparative advantage, and so that way they're able to exploit that comparative advantage and be the best at producing whatever that is. Those who look at the world kind of in those who look at through the lens of things like the dependency theory look at it more as the Western countries kind of dictating to the other countries around the world about what they will produce based upon the things that they demand, and so it's going to keep them in these low-wage situations. But again, it's still this idea that, and it's still a really interesting idea that you have all these components of industry flung all over the world, and they come together in a relatively almost seamless fashion that allows us to have the large quantities of cheaply produced goods that we can find at our various stores and that we're able to experience on a daily basis. The next one was called just-in-time production. Now this really has nothing to do with economic theory or structuralism or anything like that. This is just one of the new concepts that's actually being used within industrialization in our modern world. And this is a much more streamlined process. So basically what happens is in just-in-time production, the parts that are a part of the, sorry for the redundancy, the parts that are a part of the industrial process are no longer mass-produced and stored at the production facility. Instead, the parts are made and then they're delivered to the production facility as they're needed. And so this is huge because what it does is it cuts down the amount of space that you need for things like storage and inventory. And it also cuts down on production costs because this means that you don't have an overabundance of parts that need to be stored. You don't have to produce more parts than you need. The things that allows for this to happen obviously are things like more sophisticated communication and transportation infrastructures. In a lot of these cases, you actually have the machines in the factory communicating with each other about the various parts that they need. If you've ever seen the Coca-Cola Freestyle machines, the Coca-Cola Freestyle machines actually have they actually have a communication piece to them that can speak to the warehouse facility whenever they're running low on one of their cartridges in their beverages. And so the store actually doesn't have to order the different cartridges that are a part of the Freestyle machine. The Freestyle machine orders it for them. That's not necessarily the same thing as just-in-time production, but it kind of speaks to this idea of the improved communication systems. One of the other things that's coming out as a part of this, I wouldn't say it's necessarily just-in-time production, but it's definitely something really interesting, that maybe works into just-in-time production, are the 3D printers that are coming out. And this whole idea of storage and inventory. Storage and inventory are really expensive for companies because you have to have all this extra space to store the stuff, and then you use it as you need it. If you can cut down on storage and inventory, that means you can cut down on space, which means you can cut down on the cost it takes for construction, which is, as those costs come down, then of course profits are going to rise because you're able to cut production costs. So if you think about 3D printers, this idea that you could, almost print anything that you need as a component of your facility, you could do all those things in-house, and you wouldn't even have to outsource the production of the different components of whatever it is that you're making. So those are just some new concepts that are a part of the new global industrial process that, again, are really impacting industry, and it's really impacting the economy that we live in because of the way that we can access goods and the way that goods come from all over the world. So anyway, that's just kind of a follow-up video to our previous video, so I hope you found that to be helpful. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comment box below, and I hope to see you next time.